Well, Lee, thank you for joining us here at Life Point Church this morning. You just got done preaching at our Lake Stevens campus, and we're in a series called Red Flags, talking about relationships, and you helped us unpack a lot when it comes to just family life, and all that kind of stuff. And so I just want to jump right in. You shared the significance of instilling family values.
Yep.
How should we model our faith in everyday life so it's like a natural thing for our children to kind of see and be raised with, especially in a time like this where people are stressed out, they got work, how do you maintain that kind of family value in a person's life?
I think what's interesting is, the term family values kind of got hijacked for a while where it meant something different, versus the idea of like, when I unpack values, it's the idea of each home, each family, and the parents that are responsible for setting the culture, the tone of that home, should have an understanding of our values. It's the things that are your unique DNA that you guys care about, you prioritize, that are non-negotiable. And so I would go as far to encourage people from a biblical standpoint to really take their biblical perspective and then thread that through and go, this is what our family is going to value, and to then live that out in behaviors. And I think part of the challenge is that the values that we choose will force us to make some decisions around what we say yes to and what we say no to. And how does that then impact the culture and the climate of our home? I think that yes-no conversation, especially through the lens of biblical principles, is a conversation that we should have in our homes more often, and that parents should try to make a catalyst for the decisions. I think sometimes where we as parents get into a tough spot is we haven't established clearly those values, and then we're making decisions. And for the family, especially as kids become more mature and older, it's confusing because it feels like I'm not clear what the value was. I thought this was our value, and now we're violating
Trying
that.
to decide what it is in the moment, and then the kids are confused. They're like, what the heck do we even value here?
And we did talk about the idea that values are either what you create or what you allow. So if you're a home that isn't clear around values, that doesn't mean you don't have them. It just means you haven't clarified them. And so if you can clarify them both in concept, but also in behavior and decision making, it's going to set you on a path that's going to make you more likely to get to the place where your family represents what your desire is and what God's plan is for family. Let's be honest. Family's messy. Like this, it's, back 15 years ago, churches are doing messages around, 4 ways to have an awesome family and 3 ways. And it's like, it's just not that formulaic. Family dynamics are different now. Blended families, single moms, single dads, all of those things. And so it's just different. And so I believe that God still has a plan for families, but I think we have to be clear on what destination we're shooting for and what's the value road that we want to use to get there.
And so how would somebody, like, just speaking in just like practical terms, like, is this between 2 spouses, like sitting together, like, hey, we're going to take time and we're going to pray through these values? Like, what would that look like for maybe you guys in your own relationship when it came to like values in your family?
Yeah, I think that I would encourage intentionality.
Okay.
So especially if you're a younger family, maybe you're just getting started in your family, I would encourage strongly the practical intentionality of like, let's talk about those core values that we want to have in our family. These are the things that we believe in and are going to make decisions on. I think for my wife and I, we probably came to that realization later, more not accidental, but more probably as a result of what we were trying to figure out. And when all of a sudden we realized, like, these are the things we care about, so let's do that. And so I think for every family, it's going to look a little bit different, but I do think there's some practical conversations that should happen. If you're a family that wants to write them up on a chalkboard, go for it. But there needs to be at least a clarification process of the 4 or 5 family values. It's interesting that if you were an entrepreneur, if you were starting a business, if you were leading a business, that you at some point would have that conversation. What does this particular Starbucks, they have value around 1 cup of coffee, customized for each customer, or the third place or any of that. It's interesting that we wouldn't apply those principles to something as important as the family.
It's true. It's very true.
So it's worth the time and investment of practically getting clarity around that.
Yeah, no, that's great. In your message, you talked a little bit through Romans, and Romans talks about loving and honoring one another. How can we practically apply this concept of honoring each other in family life, and then especially during challenging moments when it's easy to let frustrations take over?
Yeah. Like anything, it's the idea of this is the biblical ideal.
Right.
And we're not excused from that ideal. While at the same time, I think part of the challenge is, even as I was standing reading that this morning, I think part of the challenge is owning that ourselves. I think we typically will read passages like that through the lens of how others are treating us versus how can I honor, how can I love. So I think my encouragement to those listening would be, try to read that through the lens of not the situation or how difficult the situation. Maybe the family's very dysfunctional or the dynamic there is unhealthy. Yeah. As much as it depends on you, live at peace, right? So as much as it depends on you, how can I honor, love, and take on that posture within the family? The family's not going to change until I change, and I could potentially be the catalyst towards that change happening.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's super helpful. And last one here, you mentioned how God often works behind the scenes. How can we cultivate a mindset that looks beyond immediate struggles to trust in the bigger picture God is planning?
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge of just being a Christ follower at its core.
Oh, yeah.
That applies to the family dynamic as well.
Yeah.
It's the idea of, having to have the confidence and conviction in, the big word sovereignty of God, sovereignty of God is just a big way of saying God is ultimately in control. Yeah. And so I always wrestle with the idea of God is sovereign and he invites us to submit to one another. And to submit to him. And so there's this interesting tension between trusting the sovereignty of God. If God is in control, it allows me to then walk in a healthier submission to others and ultimately to God. Yeah. And so I think knowing that God, with the confidence that God is in control, we then look at ways in which we could submit to that. Now, let's be candid. Yeah. In the real world, day to day, every hour, sometimes it feels really, really, we feel really lost, or it feels like God is not in control, and I think the tendency there is for us to take control. Yeah. And so I think there's a dynamic there that as we walk with God, that we have to view ourselves as sort of in partnership with God and looking for the moments where God is asking us to move, to act, to have a part or a role in how he's moving in the world. Yep. But we have to have an understanding of that in order to do that. Right. So we have to have an understanding of, okay, what is God doing? And then what's the role that I play? Yep. I think sometimes when we say God is in control, it can be sort of a throw up the hands moment. Yeah.
It's like God's Jesus, in control. Take the wheel.
Yeah. Not a great song either, really. No. But when we throw our hands up, I don't think that's the posture. I think there's an overarching macro. God is in control, and then he has an expectation of us. Yeah. There's an axiom that's been a part of my life for 20 plus years. It's interesting. It never goes away. It says this: when you don't know what to do, do what you know. And the idea behind that is, when it comes to God, sometimes we'll say, well, I don't know what God wants me to do. I don't know what God is doing. What I always try to say to people is, until God reveals that, when you don't know what to do, do what you know. In other words, God has revealed plenty about what he's up to. God has revealed plenty about what our homes are supposed to look like, what our relationship with others is supposed to look like, what our relationship is supposed to look like being in the world and not of the world. Right. So even where there's vagueness and murkiness, cool. When you don't know what to do, do what you know. And as you do what you know, we can stay plenty busy doing that, trusting that God's going to reveal the parts that are unknown to us at that moment. So I don't think not knowing or not being clear is an excuse. It's just part of the human experience as we trust God.
Yeah, definitely. And would you say, for that then, practice, this kind of is like practice makes perfect type of thing, where, because I even think about myself where it's like, okay, God is ultimately in control. But then I realize, and maybe after a long day, I'm spending all my time on my, news app, and I'm looking at all the stuff and the things in this world. And I catch myself, I'm just like, I haven't thought about Jesus in like a minute. And so would you say just like this is just like repetition, like practicing keeping Jesus and God at the forefront?
Well, and, you guys are launching practicing the way, and some of those spiritual rhythms I think are helpful in that.
Yeah.
Right. Those spiritual rhythms of quiet and prayer and those things will help us be more aware of those things.
Yep.
I think the challenge with what the news and all of that is the reality is we have this tension of God is sovereign and God has given us free will.
Yeah.
And so we have this trust in God's sovereignty, while at the same time, because of free will, we watch the world at times seem to be swirling out of control.
Yeah.
And God is still in control, but at the same time, humans are making decisions. Humans are causing, there's evil in the world, there's sin in the world.
Yep.
And in God's sovereignty, this is the play he's running, the plan he has. And so we have to understand that God's ability to control is not impacted by the free will that people have. That ultimately, at the end of the day, God's will is going to be done.
Amen. Well, awesome. Well, thank you, Pastor Lee, for hanging out with us and giving us a little extra from your message. We appreciate it.
I have a cold.
We'll get you some flu medicine. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our Extra with LifePoint episodes.